Okay, so here's Act 3, and Act 3 roughly corresponds to the de Gaulle years. Charles de Gaulle, who returns to power in France, he's been the leader of the resistance to German occupation in the war years. He returns to power as Prime Minister in 1958 and is President of the newly established Fifth Republic from January 1959, and he remains President for a further 10 years until his resignation in April 1969. When de Gaulle returns to power, a lot of people expect, and the British even hope, that he will simply denounce the Rome Treaty and walk away from it. After all, it's barely into its first year of operation. He considers that, but decides against it. France, after all, has signed on the dotted line, and de Gaulle sees Europe as carrying certain benefits for the French. However, de Gaulle remains a nationalist, and so, whereas Euro enthusiasts, Euro federalists, had hoped to see a sort of unstoppable flow of European integration from the Treaty of Rome on, de Gaulle, in certain respects, put the brakes on. Not in every respect, however. De Gaulle was very keen that the full details of the common market should be fully implemented, and indeed the EU 6 got the EC 6 got a tariff-free Europe, a tariff-free common market by July 1968, actually 18 months ahead of schedule. De Gaulle was also keen, for rather obvious reasons, to push ahead with the common agricultural policy. Obviously the agricultural policy was of most interest to France. It was going to cost money, and so it was resisted rather by France's European partners, and de Gaulle did a lot of thumping on the table to make sure that it actually got off the pages of the Treaty of Rome and onto the ground, in the most literal terms, and in the form of money in the pockets of Europe's, and particularly France's, farmers. So I think it would be wrong to say that de Gaulle was an anti-European figure. However, in two respects, he did very clearly put the brakes on. One was in relation to how the Council of Ministers should operate. The provisions of the Treaty of Rome essentially said that the Council of Ministers should only be able to accept proposals from the Commission on the basis of unanimity. That is to say, every single member state, including Luxembourg, would have a veto on new initiatives within the Council of Ministers. Now, this was perfectly acceptable to de Gaulle. De Gaulle believed in the integrity of nation states. But the Treaty of Rome expected that in due course the behaviour of the Council of Ministers, the functioning of the Council of Ministers, would pass towards qualified majority voting. That is, to states voting roughly on the basis of their population size on the Council of Ministers, and with the possibility of some member states being overruled by a reinforced majority on certain initiatives. And de Gaulle absolutely refused this idea. He refused the notion of France ever being placed in a minority and being forced to accept an initiative with which the French government and the French presidency did not agree. And in the course of what was known as the empty chair crisis in 1965, he effectively secured the agreement, albeit informal, of his European partners to retain unanimity and to retain the national veto on the Council of Ministers. In other words, de Gaulle effectively put the brake on supranationality and on deepening the European economic community to the benefit of intergovernmentalism and the rights of member states. The second respect in which de Gaulle put the brakes on, of course, was as regards widening, because the British, having first decided to stand aside from the negotiations that led to the Treaty of Rome, and then having tried to transform the common market into a simple free trade area, and that failed too, then decided that actually this thing was going to work after all, and they'd better join it. And the British presented their first application to join the European Economic Community in 1961, under the government of Harold Macmillan. De Gaulle's reaction to this, after long months of negotiations, was to veto British entry in a spectacular stage-managed press conference in January 1963, in which he said that British trade patterns and even British sentimental notions about being open to the open sea more than to the European continent precluded any British membership, at any rate until such time as the British changed their mindset. And so in these two crucial respects, de Gaulle really sort of blocked progress on European integration through the 1960s. Europe wasn't going to get much deeper as long as the national veto remained, and Europe wasn't going to get much wider as long as de Gaulle blocked British entry, as he did for a second time in 1967. So, towards the end of the 60s, really, a lot of de Gaulle's partners, who were rather more pro-European than he was, were effectively waiting for him to depart the scene and then to pick up the threads of European integration once he had gone. And therein lies our next chapter.